Welcome back to OMC Built. Today I am resuming work on the Manhattan project, my 47 Chevrolet Fleetline Aerosedan. If you've watched the videos that I've already put out, you have seen me doing modifications to the frame that include the airbag system. And so the next step is to start chopping the body here. So we need to modify the floor pan where the rear seat is and into the trunk pan for the C-notch. And this bracket right here. This bracket right here basically is where the seat bottom goes. And so we'll have to trim a little bit out, but not very much for this bracket and for the arm to have some clearance in its range of motion. The big project is getting everything cut out for the C-notch there, and then also for the front of the differential as well. Now eventually I'm going to be doing the trans tunnel here, and we are going to be doing a brand new drive shaft tunnel all the way back, because the transmission sticks up probably about right here, and so the drive shaft tunnel is going to need to be raised quite a bit. So we'll just make a new one from scratch with my slip roll. But I can't just put the body back on the frame right now and get started on the transmission tunnel or the drive shaft tunnel because the C-notch is in the way. So we're going to have to trim out quite a bit of the trunk pan and the floor pan where the seat usually goes. We're going to trim out as little as possible, taking some measurements off of the frame over here, but it's still going to be a significant amount, and the cross member right here is going to go as well. Then we'll get the body back on the chassis and we'll do any additional trimming that we need, and then we can start building some structure back into it. Now, one of the other things we're going to need to do is raise the entire trunk floor. So most of the floor pan in the trunk is going to get cut out and replaced as well, but we're going to keep as much of it in right now as we can, just for a little added structure, which is kind of silly because this section was cut out, I'm not sure why, by the previous owner. I don't know if there's rust there or they were planning on doing something else, but this is the spare tire well, and we're going to need to cut somewhere around here for the C-notch. Like I said, this structure will go. So the trunk pan isn't really going to be doing much, but we don't want to go too crazy and start cutting everything out now. We can always do that once it's on the chassis. But we're going to raise the trunk pan here. You can see right here it juts up a little bit. We're going to keep that coming up and raise the trunk pan as much as we need to, and the reason why we're going to do that is because with the thing laying on its rockers with no pinch welds, it doesn't have a whole lot of room for a fuel tank under the floor pan, at least not for the factory one. The factory one would be on the ground, and so we will redo the floor pan in the trunk. We'll raise it up a bit. We may be able to raise it up and utilize the factory tank. Otherwise, I'll just make one on my own from some sheets of aluminum, and we'll be able to fine-tune it to work in conjunction with the exhaust and everything else we're going to have going on back here. So that's the plan. But what I'm going to do first, while everything is in here and it's solid, is I'm going to scrape off as much of this rhino liner, bed liner, undercoating crap as I can, because we're going to want some clean metal to weld to when we go and raise the floor pan up, and when we do the cuts for the C-notch and put new metal back in there. And this just isn't really necessary. So I'm just gonna try a scraper and see how that works. Might try a scraper in some heat. Might also see how a wire wheel or some other type of abrasive works. Though usually those are just gonna smear it around. So I already tried just a little area with a flathead screwdriver, and the stuff has been coming off pretty easy. So I want to get all this stuff cleaned up. There's a lot of it junked up in here where the fenders mount, and so I'd like to get that stuff as cleaned up as I can so I can get those fenders mounted properly. You can see it's just kind of slobbered all over the place, so I want to take care of that while I can. If anything, just for my OCD. And then we can always put in some Dynamat down the road to cancel a little of the road noise if we want. But we'll get this all done. All this stuff is going to be done in stages too, so this is just the first stage. This paint job is not very nice, but it suffices. There's definitely some goofy stuff going on here. I don't know if this was done in a garage. I'm assuming it's a single stage paint job, but there's a bunch of damage that you'll be able to see when the hood is on, like all this stuff right here. On the other pillar, you can see this is down to the original paint, and then it's all the way down to bare metal here, and there's another chunk here. So the paint sucks on this thing. I mean, look at this whole area on the cowl. But for the first year, at least we can get it on the road. We can figure out any issues that we may have with the air suspension and the engine and drivetrain and everything else. So that's going to be a necessary part of the process. That'll just be the stage one of it, and then eventually we're going to take the body back off the frame. We're going to get it stripped to bare metal, blasted, and then we'll see really what we're working with. We will have replaced the floor pan in the trunk and everything up to about right here, and we will have replaced the drive shaft tunnel and the trans tunnel. But at that time, we'll be able to really see the condition of the floors on the inside and on the underside. And so eventually we may end up replacing all of the rest of the floor pans and maybe even putting a new firewall in. The firewall's fine. There's been some work done, not by me, to shave up the factory holes that were in it. And so all this stuff can definitely be cleaned up. But I was thinking at some point it might be nice to even get rid of this flange right here and cut along here and bead roll a whole new panel for there. But like I said, this is multiple stages, and so stage 2 or 3 is going to involve getting this thing down to bare metal, fixing any issues. I know that the inner rockers have a few little ugly spots that I want to deal with, but isn't necessary right now. And so yeah, this is definitely going to be like a 3-year project, but I want to drive it in the meantime. And so let's get started on getting all of this crap off of the inner fenders here. Alright, after an hour and 15 minutes of work, we have at least this section of the inner wheel tubs cleaned up on both sides and tried to clean up as much as this part of the trunk pan as we can. There's still a lot of goober left up in the seam there, and I'm not going to deal with that right now. Eventually I'll try to maybe use just a little bit of heat to soften it. It's going to be hard to get any type of scraper besides like a flathead in there to deal with that stuff. So this is good enough for now. Really just wanted to get it cleaned up because once I cut this out for the notch, it's going to get pretty flimsy, and so it'll be hard to get the rest of that crap off. I still need to get a little bit of the junk off right here, but that's not really too much of a big deal for right now. Next up, we need to clean up the front side of this here, which has a lot of thick goober on it, and that's not gonna be very fun to clean up. That side's not quite as bad, but still got quite a bit of mess in it. And you know, this stuff is all obviously covered up by interior panels and everything else, and so it's really not necessary what I'm going through just to clean this up. But eventually, like I said, I'm going to get this thing fully down to bare metal and address any little problems that I find because of that, and that rubberized crap isn't really going to blast off very good. So I want to just get it off now. Might as well. I got all winter to build this thing, so we'll scrape it all off, and that way when it's time to blast this thing completely, we'll be able to blast that and get it down to bare metal and really see what we're dealing with. I know that the floor pans are pretty decent. At one point it looks like this may have been replaced. I'm not sure though, because if they did a pretty good job of it. But you can see somebody at some point did some little patch panels here, and they're not a very good job. I mean, they're adequate, but the welds are pretty boogery, and you can see right up here there's some Swiss cheesing going on, and a little bit here too. But for a 74, almost 75-year-old car, I mean, it's really in phenomenal shape. If you look at like the kick panel area down here, it's really, really solid. You know, usually this part is going to be completely gone. I mean, usually this whole part is gone. So all in all, it's not too bad. The seat mounts right in this area, and there's a couple of bolts, one right here and one on the other side over there, that have broken off, and so we're going to have to get those out. First we'll try heating them and grabbing them with a vice grips. If that doesn't work, then we'll try heating them and welding a nut to the stud that's still sticking down on the back side. If that doesn't work, then we'll just drill them out. And then the brackets here to mount the doors on this side is good, but you'll see on the other side all of the bolts broke off right here on this one, and so that's going to be a little bit difficult to deal with. I can try to build up some TIG weld or even MIG weld on these and build them out so that I have something to grab onto. Otherwise I'm going to have to get it from the back side here, and it's just kind of captured in there. And so it won't be the biggest deal in the world, but lots of little stuff that we got to deal with. There's that other bolt that broke off on this side that we're going to have to deal with. So all that stuff in due time, but for now it's really getting the back chopped up enough that we can get the body back on the chassis, because doing the sheet metal for the notch and for the trunk pan and everything else is going to be quite a big undertaking. Probably take a week of my time. I've done on this Datsun project, I did basically a whole tube frame chassis into the unibody, and I replaced all the floor pans and firewall on that. And so I learned a little bit there, but this is going to be kind of the next level. And so I'm going to probably make some mistakes, but that's why I got some extra sheet metal. And hopefully after Thanksgiving here, we will be able to get the body on the frame and get jamming on all that stuff. Alright, so I finally finished the removal of the tar on the fender wells and the trunk pan and the seat floor pan area, just so that it'll be easier to figure out where I need to cut, and then when I go to weld stuff back in, it'll be easier to clean the metal up to get a good surface to weld on. And so the next step here is going to be to transfer the measurements from the frame into the car so I know where to cut. So what we're concerned about here is the bracket mount here on the frame. That's going to interfere with the floor pan just a little bit, and then the suspension travel of this arm as it goes up and down may need a little bit of trimming there in the floor pan as well. Obviously, we're going to need to trim out a decent sized section for the C-notch here. And so I'm going to start taking some measurements. I want to measure the full width of the C-notch here and see if that fits inside of the rear tubs, or if it's going to sit a little bit outside of the rear tubs and I'll actually have to cut up and over for the C-notch into the tubs. Otherwise I can just slice the floor pan out between them and then make the cut for the C-notch a lot more exact there. I'm going to take these two mounts here and I'll measure over and up and figure out where this is going to interfere with the floor. These two mounts specifically right here correspond to these two mounts right at the front of the rear seat base. And so we can go underneath the car here and you can see these are those mounts there. So I can transfer the measurements based on the hole centers from the frame over here, and we'll probably end up having to chop out a little bit of this part of the floor pan, which will be really easy to put back in. And there are another set of body mounts that you can kind of see right here, but those no longer exist because that's where the C-notch is. So we'll have to take some measurements off of this part of the frame to come backwards to see where the C-notch is going to be and to figure out how much of the floor pan right here we're going to need to cut out. And then the other frame notch or frame mounts that still exist are these holes right here. So we can measure from these holes and from the holes at the seat base forward and back to double check everything to measure out where we need to cut. Now, I'm pretty sure, I'm positive that this structure, this cross member here is going to need to go, and probably about this much of the floor pan to clear of the rear notch. If the C notch fits in between the inner fender wells here, then all I have to do is trim out from here over on the floor pan. And since I'm going to be replacing the majority of the trunk floor pan, it doesn't need to be super precise on this side. On the side where the seat bottom is, I don't want to take out more than I have to, because there's a lot of stuff going on there with some compound curves and everything else, and so it'll be cleaner to take as little as I need and then start the C notch right there. And so we need to take some measurements based off of these mounts here and this mount back here, and then we'll start transferring those over to the body. Alright, so I've marked the floor for the brackets for the triangulated link rods. There's really not much that I have to remove down here, which is nice. And I have the front and back part of the C notch marked where I have to cut, as well as the seat back right there. Now I'm just going to figure out the last cut I'm going to need to make, which will be for the differential. So I'm just going to take a measurement here. We'll call that 48. And so half of that is 24. So we know from that point the differential sticks out 7 inches . All right, we got everything marked out now, and I'm pretty confident that with these cuts, everything will clear when we go to put the body back on the frame. And so the next step is going to be to cut it all out. We have the marks laid out for the triangulated link brackets. Just need to cut out this small little area there. And then we have the cut for the C notch. We'll be removing this cross member and part of the seat back, and then we'll need to cut this out for the snout of the differential to clear as well. And of course we'll be building a new drive shaft tunnel and transmission tunnel, but I want to leave as much of this structure in as possible until I get some structure built back in. So once the body is bolted back to the chassis after I cut all this out, then I can remove the rest of the trunk pan, knowing that nothing will change shape when it's bolted to the chassis. And then I'll basically work my way from the edge of the trunk forward up over the notch, work our way to here, and then at that point we may end up replacing the floor pan up to and maybe even past where the seat back goes. I'm not really sure. It's time to break out the angle grinder and get chopping.
we're just out here giving remembrance. I mean, I think it was the best Taco Bell in Montgomery.